Nanny child rescue story boy rejects 5 wealthy women, chooses humble maid as true mother. Autumn shadows in Brookhaven. The first breath of autumn in Brookhaven carried with it a subtle chill, a kind of quiet reminder that seasons always move forward, even when hearts lag behind. Along the tree-lined avenues of this wealthy suburb, leaves had already begun their slow descent, drifting like burnt orange confetti onto the immaculate lawns of stone mansions. Among these estates, one house stood apart, not because it was larger or more extravagant, though it certainly was, but because of the way it seemed both grand and sorrowful at once. The Whitmore estate, a sweeping Georgian mansion with towering white columns and windows as tall as a man, gleamed in the golden light of early morning. To passers-by, it looked like a postcard of American success. Carefully manicured hedges, a fountain in the driveway, and iron gates polished to a silver sheen. But those who knew the family, or what was left of it, understood the quiet ache embedded in those walls. Inside lived Daniel Whitmore, a man in his early 40s whose fortune had been made in real estate developments across the East Coast. His face was the kind people associated with confidence and resolve. Sharp jaw, pressed suits, a posture that seemed incapable of bending. Yet since the passing of his wife nearly a year earlier, the edges of that image had begun to fray. His colleagues noticed how he lingered less at meetings and more often stared through glass windows, lost in thought. Business partners whispered that his drive remained intact, but his heart no longer sat at the table with them. Most of all, the loss weighed heavily on his 8-year-old son, Lucas. Once a lively child who collected baseball cards and spent afternoons building forts out of couch cushions, Lucas had grown quieter, more withdrawn. His teachers wrote gentle notes. "He's very bright but often distracted," or "Lucas seems sad during group activities." Daniel read these comments at night and folded the papers neatly, placing them in his desk drawer as though organizing them could somehow organize the ache of fatherhood he didn't know how to solve. That morning, the mansion's cavernous kitchen smelled faintly of fresh bread and lemon polish. A young woman named Marisol Alvarez moved quietly from counter to counter, her dark hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. At 23, she was new to Brookhaven, having grown up in a modest neighborhood 2 towns over. She had been hired as a housekeeper only months ago, yet her presence already seemed stitched into the rhythm of the household. Marisol's tasks were endless, polishing the dining table, scrubbing stair rails, folding linens crisp as paper. But her true importance lay not in what she cleaned, rather in what she noticed. She noticed the way Lucas left drawings scattered on the table but never showed them to his father. She noticed how Daniel poured himself another coffee every evening as though caffeine could replace conversation. Most of all, she noticed the silence, the kind that grew too heavy for a house so large. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Lucas padded into the kitchen in his socks, clutching a crumpled sheet of paper. "Miss Marisol," he whispered, holding it out shyly. She knelt, smoothing the paper to reveal a bright sketch of a treehouse. The lines wobbled, but the intention was clear. "That's wonderful, Lucas," she said warmly. "You drew every board of the ladder." He nodded, eyes downcast. "Mom used to say we'd build one, but now—" His voice trailed off. Marisol's chest tightened. She wasn't family, wasn't even supposed to fill that role, yet in that moment she understood something deeper than chores. She gently touched his shoulder. "Sometimes dreams wait for us," she said softly. "Maybe one day you and your dad will build it together." Lucas studied her face for a long time before managing a small smile. It was the kind of fragile smile that revealed how desperately a child longed for steadiness. Upstairs, Daniel watched from the balcony that overlooked the kitchen. He had come down for another cup of coffee, but paused when he saw the exchange. Something about the tenderness in Marisol's voice unsettled him, not in a negative way, but in the sense that it revealed what he had failed to provide. He turned away, unsettled by the thought that his son might find comfort in the maid rather than in him. For weeks, Daniel had tried to bury his grief beneath work. His firm had just broken ground on a skyscraper in Manhattan. Investors demanded constant updates. Yet every time he left the mansion, he worried about Lucas. Wealth had given them every material comfort, but no amount of polished wood or imported chandeliers could fill the absence of a mother. That absence echoed in the hallways, in the half-finished Lego sets abandoned on the living room floor. Neighbors whispered about Daniel's decision to remain single. Some suggested he would soon remarry. Others claimed he was too broken to risk intimacy again. But Daniel had begun to consider a radical idea. Perhaps Lucas needed more than a housekeeper's kindness or a father's distracted love. Perhaps the boy needed the stability of a maternal presence. This thought grew in him, stubborn and persistent. He remembered how his own mother, a stern but loving woman, had shaped his character. Could Lucas thrive without someone like that? And yet, how did one replace the irreplaceable? On that particular autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled across the driveway and Marisol hummed quietly while wiping the counter, Daniel stood by the window upstairs, lost in thought. The mansion looked perfect from the outside, but he knew appearances deceived. He was a man who had conquered markets, built towers of glass and steel, but in the quiet of his own home he faced an emptiness no blueprint could solve. And so, in the silence of that grand estate, Daniel Whitmore made a decision that would alter the lives of everyone inside those walls. It was a decision that, on paper, seemed logical, even strategic. Yet beneath it lay desperation, a father's fear that his son would grow up incomplete. What Daniel didn't yet understand was that love, in its truest form, cannot be scheduled, purchased, or orchestrated like one of his developments. It arrives quietly, often in unexpected places, sometimes in the form of a young maid who kneels beside a grieving boy with nothing more to offer than patience and a steady heart. A maid's quiet bond. Marisol Alvarez never set out to be more than a housekeeper. When she first applied for the position at the Whitmore estate, her goal was simple: steady work, decent pay, and perhaps a sense of stability after years of drifting between part-time jobs. Her mother, who still lived in a modest apartment above a grocery store, reminded her gently, "A job is a job, Mija. Be respectful, stay humble, and doors will open." Marisol carried those words into the mansion every morning, repeating them in her mind as if they were part of her uniform. At first, her presence barely registered in Daniel Whitmore's world. To him, she was another name on the payroll, someone to keep the machinery of the household running smoothly. But Lucas saw her differently. Children, unfiltered and unpretentious, sense authenticity in ways adults often forget. From the first day Marisol entered the house, Lucas noticed that she knelt to look him in the eyes instead of towering over him. She didn't rush his words, didn't correct him harshly. Instead, she listened. And in that simple act of listening, she created a bridge no one else had bothered to build. It began with small gestures, packing his lunch with notes scribbled on napkins. "You're braver than you know," or "Remember to smile today." Lucas would slip them into his pocket, unfolding them secretly at school. Teachers noticed he began to participate more in class, offering hesitant answers where once he had remained silent. His classmates, who had teased him for being the quiet kid, began to see glimmers of the boy he used to be. In the evenings, while Daniel remained in his study surrounded by blueprints and contracts, Marisol sat with Lucas at the kitchen table. She guided him through math problems, praised his drawings, and patiently listened to stories about his late mother. Sometimes Lucas's voice would tremble when he described her laugh or the way she tucked him in at night. Marisol never tried to replace those memories. She simply acknowledged them, saying softly, "She sounds like someone who loved you very much." One night, Lucas brought down an old photo album. The pages were frayed at the edges, fingerprints smudging the glossy surfaces. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward her as if offering a secret. "This was Mom," he whispered, pointing to a picture of a smiling woman holding him as a baby. Marisol studied the image respectfully, sensing the sacredness of the moment. "She looks kind," she said. Lucas nodded. She used to sing me to sleep. I don't remember the songs, just her voice. Marisol hesitated, then began humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing. The tune was unfamiliar to Lucas, yet something in its rhythm calmed him. He leaned against her shoulder, closing his eyes, and for the first time in months fell asleep without tears. When Daniel later found them, Lucas slumped peacefully and Marisol still humming. He froze in the doorway, struck by the intimacy of a scene he hadn't expected. A pang of guilt rippled through him. It should have been him, not a maid, who comforted his son. And yet he couldn't deny the relief he felt seeing Lucas at peace. Outside the mansion, Brookhaven carried on with its polished routines: garden parties, charity galas, board meetings. Inside, though, a quiet transformation was taking place. The bond between Marisol and Lucas deepened, woven through with small rituals. They baked cookies on Sundays, their laughter echoing through halls that had long been silent. They built forts out of blankets in the living room, Lucas insisting she crawl inside with a flashlight so they could tell stories. Sometimes he'd test her patience, leaving toy cars scattered across the floor. But instead of scolding, she turned cleanup into a game. Daniel observed all this with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Part of him admired Marisol's instinctive compassion. Another part worried about boundaries. Was it proper for a maid to blur the line between servant and surrogate mother? He asked himself this late at night, pacing his office with a glass of bourbon in hand. Yet every time he considered pulling her back into a strictly professional role, he saw Lucas's face, brighter, lighter, slowly healing, and so he let it be. One crisp evening, while Marisol was folding laundry in the sitting room, Lucas bounded in, excitement spilling from every word. "Miss Marisol, I scored a goal at recess today. First one since Mom." His cheeks flushed with pride. She set aside the folded shirt, clapping her hands. "That's incredible. Lucas, you should be proud." He grinned, then lowered his voice as though confessing a secret. "I wished she could have seen it, but when you cheered for me this morning before school, I felt like someone believed I could do it." Marisol's throat tightened. She never intended to step into the boy's emotional life so fully, but how could she not? It wasn't about replacing his mother. It was about giving him something steady in the here and now. She ruffled his hair, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Lucas, you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to prove it alone." These moments of trust stitched themselves into the fabric of the household, yet beneath them Daniel's sense of inadequacy grew. He remembered his late wife's last words in the hospital: "Promise me you'll take care of him." He had promised, but what did that care look like? Did it mean providing financial security or emotional presence? He feared he was failing at both. Watching Marisol and Lucas together forced him to confront a truth he wasn't ready to admit. Money could build skyscrapers, but it couldn't rebuild a child's broken heart. And so, day by day, the mansion shifted. It was no longer just a monument to wealth. With Marisol's laughter mixing with Lucas's, the house felt almost alive again. The echo of emptiness was slowly replaced by something warmer, though neither Daniel nor Marisol fully recognized it yet. They were all orbiting around one another, each trying to find where they belonged in the constellation of this fragile family. 5 guests arrive. The first frost of October touched Brookhaven with a silver glaze, crisping the air and sharpening the edges of each morning. At the Whitmore estate, preparations hummed quietly beneath the surface. The butler polished the grand chandelier until it gleamed like starlight. The groundskeepers trimmed hedges into perfect symmetry. Caterers dropped off trays of hors d'oeuvres for the evening, though no party was scheduled, at least not in the usual sense. Daniel Whitmore had decided, after months of private deliberation, to invite 5 women into his home. They were not ordinary guests. Each one came from privilege, influence, or accomplishment. They were, in his mind, possible candidates to step into the role of a stepmother for Lucas. The plan was unconventional, even absurd by certain standards. Allow them to live under his roof for 30 days to interact with his son, and at the end let Lucas himself decide who, if anyone, should become his new mother. To outsiders, it might have seemed cold, transactional. But Daniel justified it as structure, as a way to make an impossible decision less arbitrary. He told himself that love could grow from opportunity, and that by providing Lucas with options, he was empowering the boy rather than forcing change upon him. Still, beneath his rationalizations simmered an unease he refused to name. Marisol knew nothing of the plan until the morning the gates swung open. She had just set down a basket of fresh linens in the hall when the low rumble of engines rolled across the driveway. Curious, she peered through the tall window and froze. 5 luxury cars, sleek, gleaming machines, glided in like a procession. Sunlight bounced off polished hoods, scattering blinding flashes across the marble floor inside. The first door opened, and a woman in a sapphire dress stepped out. Her stride was crisp, confident, carrying the authority of someone who had argued cases in front of judges and won. This was Victoria Hale, a Manhattan attorney known for dismantling opponents with her razor intellect. Even from a distance, her sharp eyes scanned the mansion as though preparing to cross-examine its walls. Behind her arrived Dr. Celeste Martin, a cosmetic surgeon whose name appeared in glossy magazines beside celebrity clients. Dressed in pristine ivory, she exuded an almost clinical perfection, every smile rehearsed for cameras. Then came Evelyn Ross, an award-winning architect in a tailored black suit. Her gaze immediately swept the structure of the estate, as if mentally sketching renovations before even crossing the threshold. The fourth car delivered Serena Price, a social media influencer with millions of followers. She wore crimson silk, her hair cascading in immaculate curls, every angle of her body seemingly aware of invisible cameras. The last arrival was Miranda Sloane, heiress to a media empire, stepping out in champagne silk with a necklace that caught the sun like fire. She didn't glance at the house so much as assume it was hers already. Marisol clutched her apron, shrinking back from the window. Against their polished presence, she felt like a smudge on glass. Her work-worn hands, her simple blouse, her sensible shoes, none of it belonged to the world striding up those stone steps. Upstairs, Lucas had been summoned to his father's study. He pressed his nose against the glass beside Daniel, watching the parade of women. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thin with uncertainty, "why are they here?" Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "They'll be staying with us for a little while, 30 days. At the end, you'll decide who should be your new mother." Lucas's small fingers clutched the sleeve of his father's jacket. His eyes, wide and startled, flicked back to the driveway. He didn't answer, only pressed closer against Daniel as if the fabric could shield him. When the front doors opened, the mansion transformed into a stage. The women entered one by one, their heels clicking against marble like metronomes of ambition. The butler bowed slightly, leading them toward the grand hall where a glittering chandelier spilled light across polished wood. "Mr. Whitmore, your home is magnificent," Victoria Hale announced, her tone somewhere between compliment and verdict. Celeste offered a faint smile, her eyes sliding toward Marisol, who had been asked to serve drinks. As Marisol set down a tray of glasses, her hand trembled slightly. A glass tipped, spilling drops of sparkling water onto the table. Serena chuckled, her voice pitched low but audible. "Well, a maid will always be just a maid." Lucas, standing near the doorway, frowned and rushed forward. "It's okay, Marisol, I'll help." He grabbed a napkin, blotting the water quickly. His loyalty startled the women, their smiles flickering with annoyance. Daniel's gaze hardened. "This is Marisol Alvarez," he said firmly. "She has cared for my home and my son with diligence. I expect her to be treated with respect." Victoria arched a brow but forced a polite smile. "Of course, Daniel, we only mean that everything in such a home should be impeccable." Beneath the chandelier's light, tension thickened like fog. Marisol lowered her eyes, silently collecting the empty tray, but her pulse thudded against her ribs. She had never felt so conspicuous, so painfully aware of her place. And yet when Lucas looked up at her, smiling his small, protective smile, something inside her steadied. As the introductions continued, Marisol lingered at the edges, listening. Each woman spoke of her accomplishments, degrees, accolades, networks of influence. They were auditioning, though none admitted it. To the guests, the evening was a competition disguised as civility. To Marisol, it felt like the beginning of a storm. By the time the women retired to their appointed rooms, the mansion's air had changed. No longer quiet, it pulsed with unspoken rivalry. Lucas retreated to his bedroom, unsettled, while Marisol cleaned the hall in silence. Through the window, she saw the 5 cars parked like sentinels of a world she did not belong to. And though she told herself she was only staff, her heart whispered a different truth. She feared losing the fragile bond she had built with the boy who needed her most. First frictions appear. The first nights of the women's stay turned the Whitmore mansion into a stage play with shifting scenes of elegance and rivalry. Each woman entered with rehearsed grace, but beneath their velvet words lurked sharp edges. The butler and kitchen staff exchanged uneasy glances as conversations carried both charm and calculation. For Marisol, the tension was palpable, like a storm building behind closed doors. On the second morning, she polished the oak staircase, her hands red from scrubbing. Lucas lingered nearby, tracing patterns on the banister with his finger. He seemed comforted by her presence, even in silence. That comfort was tested when Evelyn Ross, the architect, strolled by carrying a steaming cup of coffee. She paused mid-step, tilted the cup ever so slightly, and a dark splash of liquid spotted the polished wood. "Oh, dear," Evelyn said in a tone dripping with insincerity. "What a mess. I suppose you'll have to clean it all over again." Marisol blinked, cloth in hand. Before she could respond, Lucas's voice rang out from above. "You did that on purpose." His accusation sliced through the hallway like a blade. The room stilled. Evelyn bent down with a patronizing smile. "Sweetheart, adults aren't clumsy like children. You must have imagined it." But Lucas stepped down 2 stairs, his face red. "I saw you." He rushed to Marisol's side, defiantly gripping her hand. His small act of defense left Evelyn momentarily speechless. She straightened her posture, forcing a thin smile before striding away. Later that afternoon, another accident occurred. Doctor. Celeste Martin entered the living room with a delicate crystal vase, placing it near the edge of the table. Moments later, she brushed past it, the vase tumbling with a shatter that sent water spilling across the floor. She turned sharply toward Marisol, who was dusting the nearby bookshelf. "Careful," Celeste scolded. "You shook the table. I hadn't even finished placing it down." Marisol froze, words catching in her throat. She had touched nothing. Before she could defend herself, Serena Price chimed in smoothly. "A house this grand deserves staff with more training." At that exact moment, Daniel entered. He found Marisol kneeling to mop water while Celeste and Serena stood composed. "What happened here?" His voice carried authority, but also suspicion. Celeste's smile returned in an instant. "Nothing serious, Daniel. Just a small accident, no harm done." Marisol lowered her gaze, pressing the cloth into the water-stained rug. She felt her cheeks burn, not from guilt, but from helplessness. Daniel hesitated, studying her, then moved on without pressing further. The women exchanged triumphant glances once his back was turned. That evening, the 5 gathered on the terrace for tea. The autumn sky glowed with fading light, painting their gowns in hues of amber. Their voices, low and conspiratorial, wove plans. "I've already scheduled a private consultation with the city's top preparatory school," Victoria Hale announced, swirling her cup with smug pride. "Education is the foundation. Lucas will flourish under my guidance." "Please," Serena scoffed lightly, adjusting her crimson scarf. "Children crave fun. I'll take him to Disney World. He'll never forget it." Evelyn tapped her manicured nails against the table. "I'll redesign his bedroom into a modern space. A child grows by environment. Sophistication breeds maturity." Celeste lifted her chin. "Health comes first. I've arranged appointments with the best pediatrician. No mother should neglect that." Miranda Sloane leaned back, her champagne bracelet glinting. "Connections matter most. With me, Lucas would inherit influence across the media world. Doors open when I knock." They spoke with certainty, as though love were something to be purchased, scheduled, or engineered. None mentioned listening to Lucas, or the way his eyes lit up when Marisol folded paper cranes for him. Meanwhile, inside the kitchen, Marisol stirred a pot of soup. She wasn't thinking of strategies or influence. She was remembering Lucas's whispered worries, how he sometimes woke from dreams calling for his mother. She knew a bowl of soup couldn't erase grief, but it could warm a child's belly on a cold evening. It could remind him that someone noticed when he was hungry. Upstairs, Daniel sat in the library with Lucas, trying to measure the women's progress. "What do you think of our guests?" he asked, expecting polite answers. Lucas looked down at his sketchbook, hesitating. "They are pretty," he said finally. "They bring me gifts," but his voice trailed off. "But what, son? They are not like Marisol." Lucas's tone was quiet but firm. He bit his lip. "When you're around, they smile. When you leave, they look at me different. Marisol doesn't change. She's always the same." The words struck Daniel with unexpected force. He had considered Marisol merely a staff member, yet his son described her as the one person who gave him consistent love. Daniel leaned back in his chair, silent. In the stillness, he felt the weight of his experiment pressing down. 5 ambitious women, yet the bond his son craved was already living under his roof. For the next few days, small tensions rippled through the household. The women grew increasingly aware that Marisol's quiet presence cast a long shadow over their efforts. Every time Lucas laughed at her jokes or reached for her hand, their smiles tightened. Every time Daniel's gaze lingered a second too long on Marisol's patience, their ambition sharpened into resentment. Marisol, though aware, tried to keep her head down. She told herself she was invisible, that her role was to clean, to cook, to step aside. But invisibility became impossible once the women turned their eyes on her, seeing not a servant, but an obstacle. The Whitmore mansion, once solemn and still, had become a chessboard. Every compliment, every glass of wine, every carefully placed vase was a move in the game. Marisol found herself unwillingly drawn into it, though her only weapon was kindness. A weapon underestimated by those who mistook cruelty for power. Ethan's innocent defiance. Lucas Whitmore had always been a quiet boy. Since the loss of his mother, words came sparingly, like coins spent cautiously. But when it came to Marisol, he found courage. Something about her steady presence, her gentle voice, coaxed out the bravery he thought he'd lost. That bravery would be tested again and again in the weeks following the arrival of the 5 women. On a chilly afternoon, the household gathered in the sunroom for tea. The autumn light slanted across polished floors, casting long shadows from the high-backed chairs. Miranda Sloane, draped in silk, reclined with calculated elegance. She lifted a glass of sparkling water and let her words fall like blades. "Daniel," she said sweetly, "surely you see how attached Lucas is to the help. It's charming, of course, but dangerous. Children confuse affection with familiarity. What he needs is refinement." The remark slipped through the air, sharp and deliberate. Marisol froze where she stood, carrying a tray of biscuits. Lucas's eyes darted to her, his small hands tightening into fists. Before Daniel could speak, Lucas pushed back his chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "That's not true." His voice trembled but rose in volume. "She's not just the help, she's my friend, she cares about me." The room stilled. Miranda blinked, surprised by the force of his words. Victoria Hale, ever the lawyer, attempted to smooth the tension. "Lucas, no one doubts her kindness, but kindness doesn't make someone a mother. A mother must provide guidance, education, and—" "I don't need your kind of mother," Lucas interrupted, his cheeks flushed. "You don't even know me." The women exchanged stunned glances. Children were supposed to be pliable, easily swayed by gifts and promises. Lucas, however, clung fiercely to the truth he knew, that love could not be bought. Marisol's heart pounded. She wanted to pull him aside, to calm him, to protect him from the icy stares now fixed on both of them. But something inside her told her to let him stand. His defiance was not misbehavior. It was his soul refusing to be erased. Later that evening, after the tension had cooled, Lucas slipped into the kitchen where Marisol was washing dishes. His voice was quiet now, edged with worry. Did I make things worse? Marisol dried her hands, crouching to his eye level. No, Lucas, you spoke the truth, and the truth is never wrong. He hesitated, then whispered, they don't like you. Marisol sighed softly. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you know I'll always be here for you. He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Then, almost mischievously, he pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket, a drawing of a knight standing in front of a castle, shield raised. Above it, in shaky letters, he had written, Protector. That's you, he said simply. Marisol's eyes blurred with sudden tears. She pulled him into a hug, whispering, and you're braver than any knight I've ever known. The next days only deepened Lucas's resolve. Whenever the women tried to undermine Marisol with sly comments or staged accidents, Lucas was there. If a vase toppled mysteriously, he pointed out who had brushed against it. If Serena rolled her eyes at Marisol's simple meals, Lucas announced loudly, her cooking is better than any restaurant. If Evelyn sneered about Marisol's plain clothes, Lucas declared, she doesn't need fancy dresses. She's already good the way she is. Each defense embarrassed the women further, their smiles cracking under the weight of a child's honesty. In their world of reputation and pretense, truth was the most dangerous weapon. And it came not from Daniel, not from society, but from the boy they had all underestimated. Daniel watched these confrontations with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he admired his son's loyalty. On the other, he worried about the growing divide between Lucas and the women. His experiment had been designed to provide choice, but instead it exposed fault lines he hadn't anticipated. Each night, as he poured another glass of bourbon, he asked himself, had he invited opportunity or calamity into his home? One evening, the household gathered for dinner. The long table glittered with candles, silverware aligned with military precision. Celeste Martin complimented Daniel on the imported wine, her smile practiced. Serena regaled him with stories of glamorous brand deals. The women laughed politely at each other's anecdotes, each vying for space in Daniel's attention. Then, mid-meal, Lucas's fork clattered onto his plate. He looked around the table, his small voice steady. None of you know what I like. The laughter died instantly. Daniel leaned forward. What do you mean, son? They all give me presents, Lucas said, gesturing toward the women. But they don't know me. Marisol knows I don't like tomatoes. She knows I get scared at night sometimes. She knows my favorite story is about the dragon who turns good. He looked at the women, his eyes sharp. You don't know any of that? Silence engulfed the table. The women's carefully built facades faltered, their practiced smiles stiffening. Marisol's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. Lucas had spoken for her, and the truth hung in the air like a bell that could not be unrung. Daniel sat back, his chest tight with conflicted pride. He had wanted Lucas to choose from among the women, but already it was clear where his son's loyalty lay. That loyalty, innocent and unwavering, was becoming the fault line upon which the entire arrangement might collapse. Later, as Marisol tucked Lucas into bed, he clung to her hand. They can't make me pick one of them, can they? She hesitated, smoothing his hair. Your father wants what's best for you. But you're what's best, Lucas insisted, his voice fierce for such a small body. I don't care about their gifts. I don't care about their dresses. I just want you. Marisol's throat tightened. She wanted to promise him safety, to tell him his words would be enough. But she knew the mansion's walls held power plays beyond a child's reach. So she kissed his forehead and whispered, no matter what happens, I'll always be on your side. In the hush of that bedroom, with shadows of autumn leaves flickering against the curtains, Lucas's defiance glowed like a lantern. He was only 8 years old, but his innocent loyalty was stronger than the carefully constructed ambitions of 5 women. And it was that loyalty, the kind that could not be bribed or silenced, that would soon change everything. Schemes in the mansion. The Whitmore mansion, once echoing with little more than silence and grief, now carried a different kind of noise, whispers in corners, subtle glances, quiet schemes threaded beneath polite conversation. To the outside world, Daniel's home looked unchanged. Marble floors polished, chandeliers glowing, the great fountain sparkling in the morning sun. Yet inside, beneath its grandeur, tension pulsed like an undercurrent no guest could ignore. The five women had recognized something by the end of the first week. Marisol was not merely the help. She was competition. Each time Lucas defended her, each time Daniel's eyes lingered on her patience, their chances dimmed. Individually, they had brushed her off, but slowly their rivalry with each other was eclipsed by a common enemy. It began with small accidents. Evelyn Ross forgot a can of paint on the staircase landing. When Marisol walked by, Evelyn pretended to trip, sending paint cascading across the steps. "Oh dear, what a shame!" she exclaimed dramatically. "Such a clumsy moment. I suppose our maid will take care of it." Marisol crouched quickly, blotting the mess with a rag, but Lucas's voice rang from the railing above. "You did it on purpose. I saw you." Evelyn only laughed lightly. "Children imagine things, darling. No one will believe that." Another day, Celeste Martin wandered into the kitchen where Marisol was preparing soup. With a careless sweep of her hand, she knocked a jar of salt to the floor, the crystals scattering like broken glass. "How unfortunate," she sighed, turning just as Daniel entered. "Perhaps the staff needs more training in organization. Things like this shouldn't happen in a home like yours." Daniel frowned but said nothing. Marisol bit her lip and swept the salt silently, her hands trembling not from fear but from anger restrained. At first, these incidents seemed isolated, but on the back terrace, as the women sipped imported tea, they dropped their masks. Victoria Hale tapped her pen against her notepad, her voice low and cold. "The boy is far too attached to her. As long as that bond exists, none of us stand a chance." Evelyn smirked. "Exactly. His eyes light up every time she enters the room. It's almost irritating. She acts like family," Serena chimed in, her crimson lips curling. "But she's not. She's staff. The boy confuses affection with loyalty." Celeste crossed her legs, her tone icy. "And Richard sees it too, even if he hasn't admitted it. His silence betrays him." Miranda Sloane's voice cut sharper than the rest. "Then the solution is obvious. We remind her of her place. A servant doesn't get to compete with us." Their eyes met, a silent agreement forming, a fragile alliance, born not of friendship, but of shared malice. Five rivals became conspirators, united by their disdain for the quiet maid who had done nothing but love a grieving child. From that day forward, the mansion became a theater of cruelty. Accidents multiplied. Spilled drinks, misplaced valuables, harsh whispers just loud enough to sting. Each act designed to paint Marisol as clumsy, untrustworthy, unworthy of trust. One evening, the guests were gathered in the living room when Miranda lifted her crystal glass, speaking in a voice dripping with honey. "It's remarkable, Daniel, how composed you remain. If I were in your position, I'd be more careful. After all, you never really know the past of those you hire." Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced toward Marisol, who was serving hors d'oeuvres in silence, her hand steady though her pulse raced. He said nothing, but the remark lingered like a stain in the air. Later that night, in their private lounge, the five women clinked glasses over their newfound alliance. "Small accidents aren't enough," Victoria said firmly. "We need something undeniable. I know a journalist at the Tribune," Serena offered. "If rumors spread that she's trying to seduce Daniel, it'll stick. High society devours scandal." "Or better yet," Miranda added, eyes glittering, "hire a private investigator, dig into her past. Everyone has skeletons, and if she doesn't, we'll make some." Celeste smirked, lifting her glass. "Once her reputation is destroyed, Richard will have no reason to keep her here." They drank to their plan, their laughter echoing through the mansion's gilded halls like the prelude to a storm. Downstairs, unaware of the venom being brewed above, Marisol tucked Lucas into bed. The boy held out a paper crane he had folded with clumsy hands. "For you," he whispered. "Don't be sad when they're mean. I'll always believe you." Marisol hugged him tightly, tears pricking her eyes. She wanted to tell him not to worry, that kindness always triumphed. But she had begun to sense what he couldn't yet. The cruelty of adults could be far sharper than a child's nightmares. In the days that followed, the alliance moved swiftly. A man in a dark suit appeared at the door, introducing himself as a private investigator. He claimed to have information about Marisol's past. Daniel took the folder he offered, flipping through accusations of theft, misconduct, even inappropriate behavior with children. The signatures looked forged, the dates misaligned, but the lies were printed in official fonts, wrapped in the disguise of credibility. Daniel's heart pounded. He didn't believe it, couldn't believe it, but doubt coiled in his chest nonetheless. He looked toward Marisol across the hall, where she was kneeling to tie Lucas's shoelaces, her face lit with patience. Could such tenderness be false? The 5 women watching from the shadows smiled in quiet satisfaction. Their scheme had begun. What they didn't know was that both Daniel and Lucas had already seen enough truth in Marisol's actions to question everything else. Still, the storm was coming, and the first raindrops of ruin had already begun to fall. Rumors take flight. The first whispers began outside the Whitmore gates. A small cafe 2 blocks away, 2 women leaned across their lattes, voices lowered but tinged with excitement. "Have you heard? Daniel Whitmore's maid. Apparently she's not who she says she is." Within days, gossip sprouted like weeds. At the local market, Marisol noticed the cashier's smile had stiffened, her eyes darting toward the tabloid on the rack. The headline screamed, "Whitmore heir exposed to shady maid." Beneath it, a grainy photo of Marisol carrying groceries, ordinary, unremarkable, had been paired with paragraphs accusing her of theft, dishonesty, and worse. Marisol froze, the bread in her hands suddenly heavy. She felt the burn of strangers' stares. Someone whispered fraud as she passed the produce aisle. Another shopper crossed to the opposite side, as though her presence were contagious. When she returned to the mansion, Lucas rushed to her side, his small arms clinging to her waist. His eyes brimmed with worry. "Emma, are they saying bad things about you? I heard a lady on the street. She called you a liar." Marisol knelt, brushing his hair back. Her voice was calm, though inside her stomach churned. "They're just rumors, Lucas. Lies spread easily, but lies can't change the truth." Still, at night in her small staff room, the weight crushed her. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at her calloused hands. What future could she possibly have in a world where her name was being smeared across glossy pages? She had no family wealth to shield her, no connections to silence the noise. Only her integrity and the fragile trust of an 8-year-old boy. Meanwhile, upstairs in the mansion's private lounge, the 5 women reveled in their triumph. Copies of the tabloid lay scattered across the glass table like trophies. "You see," Serena Price said, swirling her wine. "High society never forgives a dirty past. Her name is finished." Victoria smirked. "Daniel can't risk scandal. He'll have to let her go." Miranda leaned back, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier light. "And once she's gone, it will finally be between us. The maid should have known better than to stand in our way." They clinked their glasses together, satisfaction gleaming in their eyes. But Daniel Whitmore was not so easily convinced. He sat alone in his study that night, the investigator's folder spread across his desk. The pages accused Marisol of theft, of negligence, of impropriety. Yet the more he studied them, the less sense they made. Dates overlapped. Signatures looked copied. Some employers listed didn't even exist. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. He recalled the countless evenings he had seen Marisol patiently teaching Lucas math problems, her gentle voice steady. He remembered her carrying soup to his son's room when the boy had a fever, staying awake by his bedside long after midnight. Could that be an act? His instincts, honed over decades of business negotiations, told him no. Still, the doubt gnawed. Reputation was fragile and society cruel. If the rumors continued, they could taint not only Marisol, but his son's future. He found himself caught in a battle between head and heart. Logic demanded distance, yet everything in his chest urged trust. The next morning, Daniel began to investigate quietly. He called previous families Marisol had worked for. A mother of 2 answered first, her voice warm. "Marisol, she's an angel. She cared for my children like they were her own. We cried when she left." Another, a physician, responded firmly. She is one of the most honest people I've ever employed. Whoever is slandering her is lying. Call after call brought the same response: trustworthy, hard-working, compassionate. Not a single accusation held water. Daniel exhaled deeply, his decision crystallizing. The papers were forgeries. The investigator had been bought. But by whom? His suspicion narrowed toward the very women he had invited into his home. The realization chilled him. He had opened the door to venom, and now his household was infected. While Daniel pieced together the truth, Marisol continued to endure the sting of whispers. One afternoon, she overheard two gardeners muttering near the fountain. "That maid won't last long. Rich men don't tolerate scandal." Her chest ached. For the first time since coming to Brookhaven, she considered leaving, not because she was guilty, but because she couldn't bear the humiliation pressing down on the boy she loved like a second mother. That night, Lucas crept into her small room, clutching another paper crane. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "Don't leave me, please. They can say whatever they want, but I know you. I need you." Marisol gathered him into her arms, tears spilling silently. "I'm not leaving, sweetheart. Not unless your father asks me to. But no matter what happens, remember, love is stronger than lies." In that moment, the storm outside the Whitmore mansion grew darker. Rumors once whispered had taken flight, carried by tabloids and gossiping tongues across Brookhaven's elite circles. But inside, in a small, dimly lit room, the bond between a grieving child and a steadfast maid burned brighter than ever, an ember no scandal could extinguish. Richard's growing doubts. Daniel Whitmore had built his fortune on foundations of steel and stone. He trusted contracts, blueprints, numbers that added up neatly on balance sheets. But when it came to people, to the fragile threads of loyalty and truth, he found himself navigating quicksand. The folder of accusations against Marisol sat on his desk like a poisonous weight, daring him to believe what every instinct told him was false. Late at night, he sat alone in his study. The room was lined with mahogany shelves and heavy leather-bound volumes, the smell of tobacco lingering faintly from his father's old cigar box. The chandelier above cast long shadows across his desk, illuminating the forged documents. Theft, negligence, inappropriate behavior. The words screamed from the page, but none of them fit the woman he had watched for months. He thought of Marisol kneeling by Lucas's bed when fever flushed his cheeks. He thought of her quiet laughter when Lucas showed her his clumsy origami. He thought of her voice, calm and steady, when Lucas panicked during a thunderstorm. If all of that had been performance, then she was the finest actress the world had ever known. And yet, the world outside didn't care about truth. It cared about headlines. Already whispers were reaching his colleagues at the firm. A board member had casually mentioned, "Daniel, be careful, the press is circling. One scandal could ruin years of reputation." The implications stung. His empire, built on trust and image, could be fractured by rumors as fragile as tissue. The next morning, Daniel made his decision. He would not rely on hearsay. He picked up the phone and began calling. The first number belonged to the Rodriguez family in Connecticut, whose name appeared in the investigator's report. A woman answered. "Oh, Marisol, we loved her. She cared for our twins for nearly 2 years. We were heartbroken when she moved closer to the city." "Why do you ask, Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are rumors circulating, some negative reports." The woman gasped. "Nonsense. That girl is as honest as the day is long. Anyone saying otherwise is lying." Call after call echoed the same sentiment. A physician in New Jersey, a retired couple in Pennsylvania, a daycare supervisor, all described Marisol as trustworthy, gentle, irreplaceable. Not one accusation in the folder aligned with reality. The more Daniel heard, the clearer it became. Someone was orchestrating a smear campaign. By afternoon, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His jaw tightened as suspicion shifted toward the 5 women. He recalled overhearing Serena's sly remarks, Miranda's cutting words, Victoria's sharp insinuations. He had welcomed them as guests, but now he saw them for what they were: opportunists willing to destroy an innocent woman to secure their own place. That evening, Daniel dined with the household as usual. The women sparkled in their gowns, their laughter rehearsed, their compliments dripping like honey. Lucas picked at his food, glancing often at Marisol. Daniel watched them all, silent, his face a mask of neutrality. If the women were bold enough to plant rumors, he would be bold enough to let them believe he was swayed. Only then would their carelessness reveal the truth. The women mistook his silence for agreement. Miranda leaned forward with a sympathetic sigh. Daniel, you've been under tremendous strain. Surely you realize that proximity between a maid and your son, well, it invites complications. High society will talk. They already are. Serena added smoothly, you must think of Lucas's future. A boy of his standing deserves a mother with influence, education, stability. Not. Her eyes flicked toward Marisol, who kept her gaze fixed on the table. Someone whose past is already tainted. Lucas slammed his spoon down, his small voice shaking. Stop talking about her like that. She's better than any of you. Daniel's hand rested gently on his son's arm. Enough, Lucas. This is an adult matter. But inside, his heart swelled with pride. His son's loyalty, fierce and unbending, reminded him of his own father's words. A man is measured not by what he builds, but by whom he defends. After dinner, Daniel retreated to his study. Lucas knocked softly, carrying another paper crane. Dad, they said Emma's leaving. Is it true? Daniel knelt, pulling his son close. No, son, she's not going anywhere, but I need time to prove the truth. Can you trust me? Lucas nodded, tears glistening. I just don't want to lose her. You won't, Daniel whispered, more to himself than to his boy. As the mansion settled into silence that night, Daniel stood by the window, staring at the sprawling gardens bathed in moonlight. His doubts had not vanished, but they had shifted. He no longer doubted Marisol. He doubted the women he had invited into his sanctuary. He doubted the wisdom of an experiment that had turned his home into a battlefield. The Whitmore estate, once meant to symbolize order and prosperity, had become a house of schemes. But Daniel's resolve was hardening. He would not let lies dictate his son's future. If the women thought they had the upper hand, they were mistaken. And so, beneath the glow of the autumn moon, Daniel began to form a plan, not just to protect Marisol, but to expose the vipers circling his household. The game had shifted, and this time he would be the one pulling the strings, the boy's loyal heart. Lucas Whitmore had never thought of himself as brave. Brave were the heroes in his comic books, the knights in his bedtime stories. Brave were the men who built skyscrapers like his father. But lately, courage had begun to look different to him. It wasn't about armor or swords. It was about speaking up when his chest ached with fear. It was about standing beside Marisol when the world seemed intent on pushing her away. The mansion's corridors, once playgrounds for hide-and-seek, now felt like battlefields. At breakfast, one of the women would find a way to belittle Marisol, an eye roll when she poured juice, a whisper about her clumsy hands. At dinner, another would make comments about how a maid could never understand what a child of legacy needed. Each time, Lucas felt anger burn in his small chest, hotter than he knew how to handle. One afternoon, Serena Price breezed into the drawing room where Lucas was sketching at the coffee table. She carried a box wrapped in shiny gold paper. "For you, darling," she cooed, setting it before him. Inside was the newest gaming console, gleaming and expensive. Lucas stared at it, then at her. He had always wanted one, but something in her smile made his stomach twist. Slowly, he pushed the box back toward her. "Thank you," he said flatly, "but Marisol already plays board games with me. I don't need it." Serena's painted smile cracked. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't refuse gifts like this. Children your age dream of these things." Lucas's voice sharpened. "I don't dream of that. I dream of when Mom was here, and Marisol listens when I talk about her. You don't." The words hit harder than Serena expected. Her cheeks flushed. She withdrew the box without another word, retreating with forced dignity. Moments like these multiplied. When Evelyn Ross suggested tearing down Lucas's playroom and replacing it with a mature study space, Lucas stomped his foot. "You don't get to decide what I like. Marisol already helped me make it cozy. When Celeste Martin tried to bribe him with promises of trips to Europe, he shook his head. I don't care about trips. I care about who tucks me in. At night, when the house fell into uneasy silence, Lucas slipped into Marisol's small room. He would sit cross-legged on her rug, clutching his paper cranes or sketchbooks. "Why do they hate you?" he asked one evening, his voice low. Marisol, folding laundry, looked at him with tired eyes. "They don't hate me, Lucas. They're just afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That love isn't something you can buy, and that scares people who only know how to use money." Lucas thought hard about that. Finally, he whispered, "Then I'll keep showing them. I'll show them they can't win." His loyalty wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was in the way he stood beside her when others mocked. It was in the way he insisted on helping her wipe spills, even if his small hands slowed her down. It was in the way he defended her name at the dinner table, even when his father told him to stay quiet. One night, Daniel overheard a conversation between his son and Marisol. Lucas was whispering fiercely, "If they make you leave, I'll run away too. I don't want anyone else." Daniel froze outside the door, his chest tightening. He had never seen his son so adamant, so raw with conviction. It struck him that while he had been calculating futures with contracts and alliances, his child had already chosen the only future he wanted, one anchored in love, not status. The women, of course, noticed Lucas's devotion. It infuriated them. No matter how dazzling their gifts, how polished their manners, the boys' gaze always drifted toward Marisol. They could not compete with the quiet consistency of her care. And so, their whispers grew harsher. At a late-night gathering in the lounge, Victoria Hale sneered. "The boy worships her. It's pathetic. He'll never see us if she's around." Miranda Sloane raised her glass, eyes glittering with cold resolve. "Then we make him doubt her. Children are loyal, yes, but they're also impressionable. We twist his heart, and he'll let her go." But Lucas was not as impressionable as they believed. The following morning, he overheard two of the women muttering in the hallway, their words dripping venom about Marisol. His small fists clenched. Without hesitation, he marched into the dining room and declared, "If you keep lying about her, I'll tell my dad everything you say." The women laughed it off, but unease flickered in their eyes. For the first time, they realized the boy was not a pawn. They were dealing with a child who, in his innocence, carried a loyalty stronger than their schemes. Marisol noticed the toll it was taking on him. One evening, as she tucked him in, she said softly, "Lucas, it's not your job to fight for me." "But it is," he insisted, his eyes shining. "You fight for me every day, when I'm sad, when I can't sleep, when I miss Mom. Why shouldn't I fight for you?" Her throat tightened with tears she couldn't show. She kissed his forehead, whispering, "Then we'll fight together." For Daniel, watching his son's devotion was both humbling and haunting. He had once believed that parenthood was about providing opportunities, wealth, connections. But his son's simple loyalty revealed something far more profound. Children don't measure love in gifts or status. They measure it in presence, in who listens, in who stays. And as the days rolled forward, Daniel realized with growing certainty that his carefully constructed plan, to invite 5 women of stature to win his son's affection, was collapsing under the weight of an 8-year-old boy's loyal heart. A father's hidden strategy. Daniel Whitmore was not a man easily deceived. In business, he had faced partners who smiled while plotting betrayal, contractors who cut corners, and rivals who tried to bleed him dry. He had survived because he learned to let them underestimate him. He pretended to nod, to agree, to be swayed, then waited until the mask slipped from their faces. Only then did he strike. Now, sitting at the head of his own dining table, watching the 5 women sip wine and exchange smug glances, he recognized the same performance. Their voices dripped with honey, but the aftertaste was bitter. He had suspected their malice before, but the forged folder of accusations against Marisol confirmed it. They had declared war on an innocent woman in his house, and they thought he was blind. That night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Daniel remained at the table with his glass of bourbon. The chandelier light glimmered across its surface, golden and sharp. He whispered to himself, if they think I'm swayed, let them believe it, and then we'll see how far they'll go. The next evening he set his strategy in motion. During dinner he laid his fork down deliberately, clearing his throat. The women straightened in their chairs, sensing opportunity. Marisol moved quietly at the sideboard, her back stiff, sensing danger. Lucas sat across from him, shoulders tense. "I've been thinking," Daniel began slowly, his voice calm. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps Marisol has grown too close to Lucas. Maybe confusing for him. Maybe it's best if she keeps her distance." The words landed like stones. Marisol froze mid-step, the serving tray trembling in her hands. She didn't dare look up. Lucas dropped his spoon, his face blanching with shock. "Dad, no," he shouted, his small voice cracking. "She's not confusing me. She's the only one who understands me." "Lucas," Daniel said firmly, "this is not up for debate. Adults must make difficult choices." Serena's smile widened, her eyes flickering triumphantly to the others. "Daniel, I'm glad you see it. Children need guidance from those with proper standing." Victoria chimed in smoothly, "Indeed. Attachment to staff is natural but dangerous in the long term. You're doing the wise thing." Marisol lowered her gaze, her heart shattering. She thought of the nights she had soothed Lucas through nightmares, the mornings she had tucked napkin notes into his lunch, all of it dismissed in a single sentence. She excused herself quietly, slipping into the kitchen before her tears betrayed her. Upstairs that night, Lucas burst into her small room, his face wet with angry tears. "He doesn't mean it, does he? He can't send you away." Marisol wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as if the embrace could anchor them both. "Lucas, your father only wants what's best. But you are what's best." His voice cracked with desperation. "If you go, I'll go too." Marisol shook her head, tears spilling silently. "No, sweetheart. You must stay with your father. I could never let you leave him. Promise me you won't run away." He buried his face against her shoulder, sobbing. She rocked him gently, whispering lullabies from her childhood, her own heart breaking with every note. Meanwhile, in the guest wing, the 5 women celebrated. Wine glasses clinked. Evelyn smirked. "See, he finally believes us. The maid is finished." "Now it's just us," Miranda added coldly. "And soon one of us will be Mrs. Whitmore." Their laughter echoed down the corridor, smug and careless. They did not realize every word was feeding Daniel's resolve. For though Marisol wept in her room, believing his act to be real, Daniel was watching, waiting. He needed the women to drop their guards completely, to incriminate themselves in their arrogance. Over the following week, he played his role carefully. In public, he appeared distant from Marisol, listening politely when the women disparaged her. He even asked her to step back from certain household duties, his tone formal, professional. It nearly destroyed him to see her eyes fill with quiet hurt, but he forced himself to continue. At the same time, he quietly gathered evidence. He installed discreet cameras in the hallways and common rooms, devices small enough to go unnoticed. He instructed his trusted butler to observe and report without interference. Piece by piece, he built his case. One afternoon, while passing the sitting room, Daniel overheard Serena muttering to Celeste, "It's almost too easy. He's practically pushing her out himself." Celeste laughed lightly. "Men are predictable. Dangle status in front of them and they'll abandon sentiment every time." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to storm in to end it then and there. But patience had become his sharpest weapon. If he ended it too soon, whispers might remain. He needed undeniable proof, something no guest could refute. In private moments, Daniel's mask nearly slipped. Late one night, Lucas knocked on his study door, holding another paper crane. "Dad," he whispered, "don't let them win, please." Daniel pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. "Trust me, Lucas. Sometimes to defeat liars, you must let them believe they've already won." The boy frowned, not fully understanding, but the steadiness in his father's eyes gave him comfort. And so the mansion continued its charade. The women grew bolder, their cruelty toward Marisol sharper, their whispers louder. They believed they had triumphed. But Daniel, hidden behind his measured silence, was laying the final stones of his plan. The day would come soon when truth would blaze through the Whitmore estate like fire, consuming every lie. And when it did, the boy's loyal heart and a father's hidden strategy would bring justice to light. The ball of decision. The night of the grand event arrived with the kind of spectacle only the Whitmore estate could deliver. Floodlights illuminated the sweeping driveway, casting long shadows across the trimmed hedges and marble fountain. Cars lined the street, each delivering guests in tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed. White linens draped the tables, crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers, and fragrant bouquets of roses perfumed the air. For the women, this was no ordinary gathering. Tonight was the culmination of their 30-day stay, the moment when Daniel and Lucas would announce the choice of a new mother. Their smiles were radiant, but beneath them lay ambition sharpened to a fine point. Victoria Hale entered first, dressed in midnight velvet, her poise commanding as though she were walking into court. Celeste Martin shimmered in silver sequins, her appearance polished to perfection. Evelyn Ross chose fiery red silk, her design background evident in every deliberate angle of the gown. Serena Price, in flowing ocean blue chiffon, played to the cameras, tilting her chin just so. Finally, Miranda Sloane swept in wearing gold, her diamond necklace blazing under the lights, as though she were already mistress of the mansion. Each of them moved through the crowd like stars orbiting a sun. They shook hands with Daniel's business partners, charmed his relatives, and accepted compliments with laughter that never reached their eyes. They knew tonight was their chance to cement victory, to erase Marisol once and for all. In the kitchen, Marisol stood over a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged them. She had dressed simply in a modest black dress at the insistence of the head butler. To her, the dress felt like a farewell costume. She told herself that after this night she would leave quietly, carrying nothing but the memory of Lucas's paper cranes and laughter. Lucas, however, refused to see it as an ending. As he clung to his father's hand, his heart pounded. The crowd, the music, the glittering spectacle, it all felt suffocating. He didn't want any of these women to become his mother. His choice had already been made, and it wasn't dressed in velvet or sequins. The guests gathered, their chatter fading as Daniel stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the hall. Lucas stood beside him, clutching his sleeve tightly. A hush spread across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight marks the conclusion of an unusual but important chapter for my family. 30 days ago, I invited 5 extraordinary women to spend time in this home. Each of them has shared their talents, their vision, their hopes. For that, I am grateful." Applause filled the hall. The women lifted their chins, basking in the attention, each certain her victory was moments away. "As promised," Daniel continued, "I will honor my son's decision. Lucas will make the choice." A ripple of curiosity passed through the guests. All eyes turned to the boy. Lucas's throat tightened. He looked out at the sea of faces, then at the 5 women lined before him like contestants in a pageant. He could hear Serena's voice in his head. "Children, your age dream of these gifts," and Miranda's cool words. "A servant doesn't get to compete with us." He felt anger rise, but also courage. He took a deep breath and shouted, his voice ringing clear across the hall. "I don't choose anyone, I only want Marisol." Gasps erupted. The room froze. Guests exchanged shocked glances, whispers spreading like fire. Daniel remained still, his face unreadable. The 5 women reacted with alarm. Victoria stepped forward first, her lawyer's tone sharp. "Lucas, darling, you're too young to understand what's best for you." Lucas yanked his hand free from her attempted grasp. "I know exactly what's best, and it's not you." Celeste's smile faltered. Serena forced a laugh, trying to soften the blow. "Sweetheart, you'll thank us when you're older. Sometimes adults must choose for children." But Lucas's small voice cut through their rehearsed lines. "She's better than all of you. She loves me. That's what matters." In the back of the hall, Marisol froze, the tray slipping slightly in her grip, her heart hammered in her chest. She had tried to remain invisible, to let the night pass without disruption. But Lucas's words had dragged her into the center of the storm. The guests murmured, some frowning, others nodding in admiration of the boy's courage. The women shifted uneasily under the weight of so many eyes. Their perfect facades, crafted carefully over weeks, were cracking. Daniel raised a hand, his voice steady but laced with authority. "Before we move forward, I want everyone to see something." The lights dimmed. Gasps fluttered across the hall as a large screen descended from the ceiling. The women's eyes widened, their carefully painted smiles faltering. Daniel continued, "For 30 days, this home has been filled with tension, accusations, and rumors. Tonight, I will reveal the truth." The screen flickered to life, showing footage from hidden cameras, Evelyn deliberately spilling paint with a sly smirk, Celeste pushing the vase toward the floor, then blaming Marisol, Serena whispering, "She's just a maid." Miranda and Victoria's voices, cold and gleeful, plotting to smear her reputation. The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others turned their scornful eyes toward the 5 women. On stage, the women paled, their polished images shattered under the glare of undeniable evidence. And as the footage ended, Daniel's voice cut like a blade. "This is the truth. The lies, the schemes, the fabrications, they were never Marisol's, they were theirs." He held up the forged folder, shaking it once for the crowd to see. "These documents are fakes. I spoke to every family she worked for. Each one praised her honesty and devotion. The slander ends tonight." The hall erupted again, this time in outrage, not against Marisol, but against the 5 women who stood exposed, their ambitions laid bare for all to see. Lucas rushed forward, flinging his arms around Marisol's waist. His voice carried above the noise. "I want her to be my mom. I don't want anyone else." In that moment, under the glittering chandeliers and the gaze of dozens of witnesses, the battle lines were erased. A child's loyal heart had spoken louder than wealth, louder than ambition, louder than lies. And Daniel, watching the scene unfold, knew the time had come for his final move. Truth on the screen. The screen still flickered from the final frame of damning footage. The words, "She's just a maid." Soon she'll be gone, echoing in everyone's ears. The ballroom, moments earlier a stage of elegance and power, had become a courtroom, and the jury was unanimous. Murmurs rolled like thunder through the crowd. Some guests whispered angrily, others shook their heads in disbelief, but all eyes turned toward the 5 women who stood exposed beneath the chandeliers. Victoria Hale's composure cracked first. Her practiced smile vanished, replaced by a stiff jaw and darting eyes. Celeste Martin lifted her chin, feigning indignation, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Evelyn Ross muttered something under her breath, perhaps an excuse, but it dissolved in the sea of disapproval. Serena Price's face blanched, her influencer's poise crumbling without the safe filter of curated lighting. And Miranda Sloane, the one who had carried herself like a queen from the start, found her crown stripped, her posture sinking under the weight of collective judgment. Daniel Whitmore stepped forward, his voice calm yet edged with steel. "For 30 days, I welcomed you into my home. I gave you my trust, believing you came to care for my son. Instead, you schemed, plotted, and lied, not just against Marisol, but against the very idea of family. What you forgot is that family cannot be manufactured by deceit. It is earned through love, loyalty, and truth." The room erupted in applause. Guests clapped, some even stood. Others glared openly at the disgraced women. For men and women who lived in a world of appearances, reputation was currency, and the 5 had just gone bankrupt. Marisol stood frozen at the back of the hall, her heart pounding. She had endured whispers, humiliation, and fear for weeks, never expecting vindication. Now, before an entire crowd, the lies had burned away like mist in sunlight. She felt Lucas's arms tight around her waist, his small body trembling with relief. "See, I told you," he whispered fiercely. "They can't take you from me." Tears blurred her vision as she pressed a kiss to his hair. "You were braver than all of us, Lucas," she whispered back. Daniel wasn't finished. He held the forged folder high, his voice carrying over the applause. These documents, these so-called proofs, were nothing more than weapons of slander. I confirmed it myself. Every family Marisol ever worked for spoke of her with gratitude and respect. These papers are nothing but lies, and tonight everyone here has witnessed the truth with their own eyes. The applause grew louder, echoing off the marble walls. The 5 women stood cornered, no escape left. Their once dazzling gowns seemed gaudy now, their jewels heavy chains. Each had entered the mansion confident of triumph. Each now faced disgrace too public to conceal. Victoria attempted one last defense. "Daniel, surely you don't believe." But Daniel cut her off with a raised hand. "Enough. The evidence speaks louder than excuses." The women faltered, their voices swallowed by the crowd's disdain. Guests whispered of lawsuits, suspensions, careers ruined. Already the ripples of consequence spread beyond the mansion walls. At that moment Daniel turned toward Marisol. His voice softened but carried across the hall. "Marisol Alvarez, you have not only cared for this home, you have cared for my son with a devotion that no salary could ever command. You stood tall against cruelty. You endured lies with dignity, and in doing so you revealed the emptiness of status without love." The crowd hushed. Marisol felt her knees weaken. She wanted to protest. "I am just a maid, I don't belong here," but Lucas tightened his grip on her hand, grounding her. Then before everyone, Daniel descended the platform steps and crossed the floor. He reached her side, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and met her eyes. In that moment, all the pretense, all the schemes, all the battles melted away. It was simply a man, a woman, and a child who had been broken and were now being made whole. "Lucas has spoken," Daniel said quietly but firmly. "And so have I. This family is not for sale, not for show, not for ambition. It belongs to the ones who love each other most." Gasps fluttered again as Daniel sank to one knee. From his pocket he drew a small velvet box. Inside glimmered a simple ring, elegant but understated. He held it up, his eyes never leaving hers. "Marisol Alvarez," his voice trembled slightly, raw with emotion, "you have given my son laughter again. You have given me hope again. Will you marry me and be the mother Lucas has already chosen?" For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The chandeliers sparkled above. Guests held their breath. Lucas tugged at her hand, whispering, "Say yes, please, say yes." Marisol's tears spilled freely now, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, I will." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Some guests wiped their eyes, others cheered openly. Lucas jumped up and down, his smile the brightest it had been in months. Daniel slipped the ring onto her trembling hand, then pulled her and Lucas into an embrace. Behind them, the 5 women slipped away, their gowns trailing like shadows of ambitions destroyed. They avoided the stares of disdain, their exit unceremonious, their futures uncertain. But at the center of the hall, beneath the chandeliers, 3 figures clung to one another. A man, a woman, and a boy, proof that love, tested and true, had triumphed over deception. The night that began with schemes ended with truth blazing across a screen, silencing lies forever. And for the first time in years, the Whitmore mansion felt less like a house of sorrow and more like a home reborn. Love triumphs over status. Applause still rang through the grand hall long after Daniel slid the ring onto Marisol's trembling hand. Guests rose to their feet, some clapping, others wiping tears, their voices echoing with cheers that swallowed the last whispers of doubt. What had begun as a cold, calculated selection had transformed into a moment of raw humanity. The boy had chosen love, and his father had confirmed it before all. Lucas clung tightly to Marisol's waist, his small voice rising over the roar. "I told you, Dad, she's the only one I want." His words, so innocent yet resolute, carried more power than all the women's polished speeches, their glittering jewels, their rehearsed gestures. Daniel leaned down, pressing a kiss to his son's hair. "Yes, Lucas, you were right all along." The crowd's approval swelled. Business partners who had come expecting a formal announcement of a polished new stepmother instead found themselves moved. A silver-haired man at the front row murmured to his wife, "This is what money can't buy." Meanwhile, the 5 women, once radiant and untouchable, slipped toward the exit, their steps quick and heads lowered. The applause for Marisol thundered behind them like a verdict. Each step away felt like another piece of their carefully constructed identities collapsing. In the eyes of high society, they were finished. No amount of gowns or jewelry could shield them from the shame of being caught in lies. Inside, however, no one cared for their departure. All eyes remained fixed on the new family forming at the center of the hall. Daniel straightened, still holding Marisol's hand. For the first time in years, his expression softened not just with relief, but with something deeper, gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice again, "tonight was meant to be about choice. But what we discovered is that true family cannot be staged or bought or orchestrated. It reveals itself in loyalty, in care, in love." His words struck chords in the audience. Many nodded, some even sniffled. In a crowd that often measured worth by net worth, the reminder of simpler truths felt almost revolutionary. Marisol, overwhelmed, tried to speak but faltered. I don't deserve." Daniel cut her off gently, squeezing her hand. "You deserve more than anyone else ever could. You saved my son from loneliness. You reminded me of what truly matters. That is beyond deserving. It is a gift." Lucas looked up at her, eyes shining. "Now you're really my mom." She bent, pulling him into a fierce embrace, her tears spilling into his hair. "Yes, sweetheart, now and always." The celebration continued late into the night. Guests approached to offer congratulations, some genuinely moved, others eager to align themselves with a story that would dominate society pages for weeks. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment Daniel held Marisol's hand with Lucas nestled between them. To many, it looked like the perfect photograph of redemption, wealth softened by humility, power tempered by love. But beneath the noise, the three of them clung to something far more private. For Daniel, it was the relief of fulfilling his late wife's final request, to care for their son not just with resources, but with heart. For Marisol, it was the surreal realization that her life had shifted from maid to mother, not by ambition, but by authenticity. For Lucas, it was the comfort of finally having the certainty no rumor, no lie could shake. Later, when the guests had begun to trickle out and the chandeliers dimmed, Daniel pulled Marisol aside into the quiet of the library. He closed the heavy door, leaving the applause behind. "I need you to know," he began, his voice lower, "that I pretended to believe them. I had to. It was the only way to expose them. Every word I spoke about you stepping back, it tore me apart. But I needed them careless." Marisol's eyes filled again. She placed a hand over his. "I thought I'd lost everything, but you—" She shook her head, unable to finish. Daniel stepped closer, his voice rough. "You never lost me or Lucas, and from this night forward you never will." The silence that followed was not empty but full of promises, of beginnings, of unspoken vows stronger than the ring she now wore. In the days that followed, news of the revelation spread across Brookhaven and beyond. Articles filled the tabloids, not with scandal about Marisol, but with the downfall of the 5 disgraced women. Victoria faced suspension from her prestigious law firm. Celeste's patients abandoned her practice. Evelyn lost her most lucrative contracts. Serena's followers plummeted by the thousands, brand partnerships cutting ties overnight. Miranda's powerful family publicly disowned her. For years, they had stood as symbols of status. Now they were symbols of caution, proof that deceit, no matter how gilded, ends in ruin. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore mansion, laughter replaced whispers. For the first time since his wife's passing, Daniel walked the halls with lightness in his step. Marisol, once invisible in plain uniforms, now carried herself with quiet confidence, her presence acknowledged not as staff but as partner. And Lucas beamed like a boy who had reclaimed his childhood, his heart secure. Love had triumphed over status, not in grand gestures of wealth, but in the unshakable truth that family is built not on appearances, but on devotion. And that night, under glittering chandeliers and the gaze of society, the Whitmores had proven that no amount of power or privilege could outshine the simple strength of love. A new beginning. The days following the ball felt different inside the Whitmore estate. Where once whispers and tension lurked in every hallway, there was now a peace that seemed to seep into the very walls. Servants moved with lighter steps, as if the household itself had exhaled after holding its breath for weeks. Even the grand chandeliers seemed to glow warmer, their light less harsh and more inviting. For Marisol, waking each morning no longer carried the dread of humiliation or suspicion. She no longer tiptoed through the mansion like an intruder in someone else's story. Instead, she awoke in a room Daniel had insisted she move into, no longer the cramped servants' quarters, but a spacious suite filled with sunlight. On the dresser sat Lucas's paper cranes, a collection she had brought with her. To her they were treasures far more valuable than jewels, tokens of a boy's trust and love. The wedding, when it came, was simple yet breathtaking. Daniel had no desire for spectacle. He had learned that love flourished best away from scrutiny. They chose a small chapel in town, its stone walls draped with ivy, its wooden pews worn smooth by generations. Only close friends, a few trusted business partners, and members of the household staff attended. Lucas stood proudly as the ring-bearer, his small chest puffed out as he carried the cushion with steady hands. He had insisted on helping plan everything, from the flowers to the music. "It has to be perfect for Marisol," he told his father one evening, his eyes bright. Daniel smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "It already will be. She's perfect enough." On the wedding day, Marisol walked down the aisle in a gown of soft white lace. It wasn't extravagant, but it radiated grace. Guests whispered at her beauty, but more so at the light in her eyes, a light that spoke of resilience, of a woman who had weathered storms and found her harbor. Daniel stood waiting at the altar, his expression steady but his hands betraying a nervous tremor. When their eyes met, the world around them blurred. The vows were spoken not in the grandiose language of society, but in words raw and real. Daniel promised to cherish her, to protect her not just from life's storms, but from his own failings. Marisol promised to stand by him, to love Lucas as fiercely as any mother could, and to bring warmth into a house that had once felt cold. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Lucas whooped loudly, earning a ripple of laughter from the pews. He ran forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Now we're really a family," he announced proudly. The reception took place in the garden of the mansion. String lights twinkled in the trees, tables bloomed with fresh flowers, and music drifted softly through the evening air. Unlike the ball, this gathering was filled not with scheming or judgment, but with genuine joy. The butler, who had served the Whitmores for decades, raised a toast. To a household reborn, not through wealth, but through love. The glasses clinked and cheers followed. As night deepened, Daniel pulled Marisol aside beneath the canopy of lights. "You've changed everything," he murmured. "Not just for Lucas, but for me. I'd forgotten what peace felt like." Marisol smiled softly, her fingers interlacing with his. "Peace isn't built with walls or chandeliers, it's built with people. Lucas taught me that long before tonight." Their first dance as husband and wife was not choreographed perfection, but something far more tender. Daniel moved cautiously, unused to such intimacy, but Marisol's laughter guided him. Lucas darted between them, tugging at their hands until they all danced together in a small circle, laughter mingling with music. Guests clapped, some dabbing at their eyes. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life shifted. Marisol was no longer the maid, but Mrs. Whitmore, yet she resisted the trappings of high society that now clamored for her attention. Invitations poured in from galas, charity events, and media outlets eager to parade her as a Cinderella story. Daniel shielded her from most of it, declining politely. "We don't need to prove anything to anyone," he reminded her. "We have nothing to sell." At home, Marisol focused on creating a space of warmth. She transformed the mansion not with renovations, but with presence. She filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread, encouraged Lucas to invite friends for sleepovers, and carved out quiet evenings for reading together by the fire. Slowly, the Whitmore estate ceased being a symbol of cold wealth and became what it was always meant to be, a home. And then came the day Lucas stood at the doorway of the nursery, staring curiously at the crib being assembled. Daniel placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "You're going to be a big brother, Lucas?" His eyes widened with wonder. "Really?" Marisol nodded, her smile glowing. "Yes, and I know you'll be amazing." Lucas's grin spread ear to ear. "I'll teach the baby how to fold cranes." In that moment, Daniel felt the weight of years lift. For so long, he had lived surrounded by luxury, yet starved of the very thing he needed most, family. Now, with Marisol at his side and Lucas flourishing, the emptiness had been filled. Their new beginning was not marked by the grandeur of society's approval, but by the laughter of a child, the warmth of shared meals, and the promise of generations yet to come. It was, Daniel thought, the only kind of wealth that mattered. 5 years later, 5 years had a way of softening the sharpest memories. The Whitmore estate, once a battleground of ambition and deceit, now echoed only with laughter and the simple chaos of family life. Autumn returned each year with its crisp air and golden leaves, but the house no longer felt haunted by loss. Instead, it pulsed with warmth, like a home that had finally remembered how to breathe. On a bright October morning, the garden brimmed with life. Lucas, now 13, kicked a soccer ball across the wide lawn. Taller, stronger, but still carrying the gentle smile of the boy who had once clung to paper cranes, he called out, "Careful, Gabriel, watch the ball." His 3-year-old brother stumbled after it, giggling with each clumsy step, his tiny hands messy from playing in the dirt. Near the oak tree, Marisol sat on a bench, a book resting in her lap. In her arms lay Sophia, 5 years old, with hair dark as her mother's and eyes bright as her father's. She squirmed, eager to join her brothers. "Mama, can I go too?" Marisol kissed her forehead. "In a minute, Carino, let's finish your story first." Daniel emerged from the porch carrying a basket of apples fresh from the orchard. He paused for a moment, watching the scene before him, his wife glowing in the autumn sun, his children tangled in laughter. For years he had measured success in skyscrapers and profit margins. Now success was this, a morning without worry, a family whole. "Who wants cider?" he called, his voice rich with contentment. "Me," Sophia squealed, wriggling free from her mother's arms to run toward him. Gabriel followed, tripping over his shoelaces but laughing anyway. Lucas jogged after them, steadying his little brother before he could fall. Daniel set the basket on the table beneath the pergola and drew Marisol close when she joined him. Her hand slipped into his, and for a quiet moment they simply stood, watching their children chase each other across the lawn. "You see," she whispered, "we've come a long way." He kissed her temple softly, "Further than I ever dreamed." The world beyond their garden had not forgotten the scandal that once rocked the mansion. The 5 women who had schemed against Marisol faded into obscurity. Victoria, once a feared attorney, found her career destroyed by ethics violations. Celeste's clinic closed as patients abandoned her. Evelyn lost her design contracts, her reputation permanently tarnished. Serena's followers deserted her in droves, leaving her desperate for relevance. And Miranda, disowned by her powerful family, vanished from society pages entirely. For the Whitmores, however, those names became little more than shadows of a distant past. Their focus was on building something lasting. Each season brought new milestones: Sophia's first steps, Gabriel's first words, Lucas's proud essays about family for school. Lucas especially carried the lessons of those turbulent months deep in his heart. He kept a journal hidden in the drawer of his desk. One entry written on his 12th birthday read, "Mom, Marisol didn't just save me from loneliness. She showed me that love isn't about gifts or power. It's about who stays no matter what." Daniel found the journal once by accident when tidying his son's room. He didn't mention it aloud, respecting the boy's privacy, but tears stung his eyes. Lucas had grown into a young man not hardened by grief, but softened by love. On Sunday evenings, the family gathered around the dining table for what Marisol called our sacred ritual. A meal cooked together, no staff, no distractions. Lucas chopped vegetables, Sophia stirred batter with more enthusiasm than skill, and Gabriel usually spilled flour across the counter. Daniel, once awkward in domestic spaces, learned to enjoy the mess. Laughter filled the kitchen, sticky fingers reached across bowls, and the mansion's grandness shrank into something human, something real. One evening, after dessert was finished and the children had run into the garden with sparklers, Daniel lifted a glass of cider. His eyes moved from Marisol to each child, his voice thick with gratitude. "Here's to us. 5 years ago, people thought we'd never be whole again, but today we have everything." Marisol clinked her glass with his, her smile radiant. "It wasn't luck, it was love and trust," Lucas added firmly from across the table, "and never giving up on each other." The little ones clapped as if they understood, sparks flying in the twilight. The Whitmore mansion, once a symbol of grief and deception, had become a beacon of resilience. Its walls no longer echoed with schemes, but with bedtime stories, piano lessons, and the shrieks of children chasing fireflies. The community, once skeptical of Marisol, now admired her as the woman who had restored not just a household, but a legacy. As autumn deepened, Daniel often found himself standing by the window, watching leaves drift across the lawn. He thought of his late wife, the promise he had made at her bedside. He whispered into the quiet, "I kept my word. He's safe. We're whole again." And though Marisol never replaced that chapter of his life, she had written the next one filled with light. Sometimes, the tabloids still mentioned the scandal of years past, recounting the downfall of the 5 women. But for the Whitmores, those stories were little more than reminders. The real legacy was written not in newspapers, but in the laughter that spilled into the garden each evening. And so, 5 years after a scheme nearly tore them apart, the family stood stronger than ever. Love had triumphed over lies, over ambition, over status. The boy who once whispered fears in the dark now grew tall in the sunlight, his heart anchored by loyalty. The maid who once felt invisible now stood as wife, mother, and matriarch. And the man who once buried himself in skyscrapers now knew that the greatest foundation he had ever built was the one beneath his own roof. The Whitmore story began with grief. After losing his wife, Daniel Whitmore sought to rebuild his family by inviting 5 wealthy women into his mansion, hoping one would become a new mother for his son, Lucas. It was a plan born of logic but lacking heart. The women, ambitious, elegant, and calculating, saw opportunity, not love. Their polished smiles concealed rivalry, and soon their schemes turned against the one person they feared most, Marisol, the humble maid who had quietly become Lucas's anchor. Through whispered insults, staged accidents, and forged scandals, they tried to destroy her. Yet Lucas, only 8 years old, stood firm. With the innocence of a child, he defended her again and again, reminding everyone that love cannot be bought or faked. Daniel, torn between appearances and instinct, pretended to doubt Marisol in order to expose the truth. The climax came at a grand ball when Lucas, refusing to choose any of the women, declared he wanted only Marisol as his mother. Hidden cameras revealed the conspiracies, the forged accusations collapsed, and the women were disgraced. In front of guests and family, Daniel asked Marisol to marry him. Her tearful yes transformed the mansion from a house of sorrow into a home of hope. 5 years later, the Whitmores flourished. Lucas grew into a kind young man, joined by younger siblings Sophia and Gabriel. The mansion no longer echoed with ambition, but with laughter, family meals, and love. The women who schemed faded into obscurity, while Daniel, Marisol, and their children thrived in the only wealth that mattered, trust and devotion. The lesson endures. Deceit may glitter for a moment, but love, steady, unshakable, and real, always triumphs.